Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Satisfactory. I'm AxionEvolved, and today, well, we're going back up, and we're going to look at some of the stuff we did in the last episode, because this was a big part of it right here. This iron plate factory, and, you know, it's not contributing a whole lot, it's just making iron plates, but I really like the way it looks, and this was, you know, part of a bigger set of things we did in the last episode where we're kind of getting everything ready for our rocket fuel plant. So a lot to do today. You know, we got to continue running stuff, and I actually want to take today's episode the time and talk about how I kind of approach a project like this and some of the tools I use to do it and kind of plan things out in this deck. Because I got some comments in some videos about, you know, building big things and stuff like that. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time to address that. But before I get started, we need to run more stuff back to there. So I'm going to meet you guys over there because we still got, again, more to build. So here we are. And the first thing I want everyone to notice is that we have all of the platforms finally constructed, meaning we can start throwing down machines everywhere, which that's a monumental step. That's huge. That's huge for us, right? But I also wanted to talk about how you get to something like this, right? How do you kind of take an idea and turn it into reality, right? So let's talk about this structure here, right? Because you know, I'm sure a lot of you watching, you're all experienced with Satisfactory, but there may be some people who aren't, right? And there's lots of ways to play this game. You can go utilitarian, where you're just building flat ground, and you're building the machines in nice orderly rows. And I mean, it's not like I haven't done that. I'm literally doing it right there, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, if that's how you like to play, I encourage you to do that, because ultimately, video games are about having fun. I honestly, most of the time, I would play like that too. But I have been, I don't know, I got caught by the bug, and when I watch these people, you know, on Reddit or even other YouTubers, like especially the bigger ones, like they make some cool stuff, Kibitz, crazy stuff, right? I just thought, well, let me try my hand at something like that, right? So, I mean, this kind of all started with the hexagon, right? You guys, if you've been watching this series, you might remember back at the starter factory, way out that way, I incorporated some hexagons into the design there, right? And I thought it's just such a cool design that I wanted to see if I can use it, right? So really, I just started with the hexagon. I had no idea how big this is going to be, and I had no idea how many levels it was going to be, and all that kind of stuff, right? So I would say the first step in anything like this, you need to have some sense, maybe not, let's say, final numbers, but you need to kind of know how big your things are going to be. How big is your factory? How big does it need to be? How many machines are going to be in there, right? I knew that I'm going to be making almost 200 fuel generators plus supporting buildings, right? So that's kind of why I did it this way. But when I made these, I kind of used the terrain, right? If you'll notice, if we go way out here, we're clipping in some areas even, you know? But we're really getting up to the edge of the biome in terms of not going straight into the mountains, right? But I think over here, maybe not. Maybe it's more this way. But I mean, look at how close. Like I couldn't, oh yeah, we're clipping right there. I couldn't make this much bigger and have it be symmetrical, which was kind of important to me, right? So I would say if you're playing this game and you're wanting to build something kind of crazy, right? I would say use other people's stuff, right? I mean, you could do one-for-one copy. If somebody made this one-for-one in their world, go for it. I have no problem with that. But I think what is better is you take inspiration from people, right? I've seen other people do stuff in this biome. You know, Kibitz is making a giant nuclear reactor plant here. I've seen other people do world tours where they're doing stuff with the water, with pipes and water. And so I'm just kind of taking elements I see from everybody and finding stuff that I like and just trying to incorporate some of those in my own way. And that's kind of, I think, the key. So like I've seen people do other stuff with pipes and water. I think that's super cool. I wanted to do pipes and water. There is this other YouTuber I watch whose whole building aesthetic is bright white concrete and rounded corners and, honestly, gaps like these. And yeah, you could say that I stole that. I stole the idea. Or you could say I'm kind of putting my own twist on it, because that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to take inspiration from something that I like and doing it in a way that fits kind of my taste. And because ultimately, at the end of the day, you should make this stuff for you. You know what I mean? Like, sure, I'm making this stuff for you, the audience, because I kind of want to show people, but I'm not designing it so that you'll like it, if that makes sense. I'm designing it so that I'll like looking at it, and I'm hoping that you, the audience, will like it. So that's kind of my philosophy here. And then the other thing is just to kind of try. You'll never... It's easy to look at somebody's fully completed 1,000-hour factory and think that that is just so overwhelmingly big and complicated that I could never do something like that. And this is what it looks like. When this is all done, somebody's going to see the completed work and be like, my God, I can't do that. That's way too massive. But this is how it starts. You know what I mean? It starts with a bunch of bare foundations and ideas, and then it's the ideas coming together that really pulls it off. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That's just my little ramble, my little rant about people who don't believe that they can do something like what I'm doing or what other people are doing, because I thought that way too. And then you just kind of try, look at other stuff for inspiration, find elements that you like and put them together, put a little twist on it. That's just kind of the way it is. Nobody, I don't think, maybe I won't say nobody. Most people don't just sit there in a vacuum and come up with stuff from scratch. There's always inspiration. You know what I mean? So use whatever you need. Use whatever you need for inspiration and incorporate that into your designs. And so now that I've got that out of the way, we gotta talk about what I gotta do here, right? So I'm gonna be straightforward with you guys. Because this does take so much time, I'm not gonna be able to jam through progression or progress as fast as maybe I would like. I don't do this full time, so I'm kind of fitting this in with all the other elements of my life, meaning I can only get so much done and still try to produce something in a somewhat timely manner. And so that's why we are where we are. In fact, I'm recording this the same day that I'm going to be releasing it. So that just kind of goes to show you. Anyway, yeah. So what I want to do is I want to get specifically that stuff. These guys right here. This nitrogen piped into the base. And you can see I've kind of started doing some of the work there. But I have a little bit other stuff I want to do. And let me kind of work on that and explain it a little bit more. So let's hop into that stuff being done. Okay, so this is kind of how the planning of this kind of stuff goes for me, right? I know generally that I want these pipes to get into there. And I have an idea in my mind that I want them to kind of zigzag and crisscross throughout the lagoon here. Are these tide pools? Is this a lagoon? I'm calling it a lagoon, but I don't know if that's the technical term. But anyway, I don't have like a specific plan in mind. You know what I mean? So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of trying to set the stage for myself. And then I'm letting necessity take over, if that makes sense, right? So you'll notice right here, this is a little bit different of a scenario because we're coming in with 6 pipes. And I could have split them farther back so that they're not exceeding the height of our little trench here, but I think this is fine, right? So I know that ultimately they need to get to the 6 faces over there. And so I kind of just I'm using kind of what I already have as a guide for what I need to build, right? And, one of the first problems I solved was, how do I get the pipes over the land like this? Sure, I could just clip it through, but that didn't seem clean enough. And then I did this whole bridge feature, and I'm doing that everywhere. That kind of became a defining feature of this build and this biome, where I'm using these bridges to span these land masses or to span far distances. And I think it ends up looking really good, right? So when I had this oil line in, it came all the way down like that. And then I realized, all right, well, I need to end up getting this nitrogen in here. And so all I did was I just brought it back, right? And so what was that saying? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? Well, I needed this pipe to come in this way because it's just a straight shot and it made it easy. So then essentially I just ended up making this bridge and it became a target. You know what I mean? So now that I had this target, it's just a matter of, well, how do I want to go from there to here? I could have done an offshoot, right? I could have followed this angle and just gone like that, and that would have been completely fine, But instead, I wanted to use a little bit of right angles, cut off a couple pipes, and then over here it's kind of the exact same situation, honestly. This one is for oil, but I have one a little bit farther back that is for the nitrogen right there. One that I still have to finish, by the way. And so D was taken care of. C is just coming out this way. Same thing. And then I made, a decision over here, right? I wanted to avoid crisscrossing these channels as much as possible. I'm okay with them combining, but actually overlapping and crisscrossing, I wanted it to avoid that. And so I just, made a different design decision to pop off this way. And now we have a bridge under a bridge, which is, a new thing, right? But now that's the target that I was working towards. And yeah, I could have done the same thing. I could have just carried this all the way out and connected at some kind of weird angle, but I didn't. I'm using right angles and other types of angles to figure it out. And that's kind of what I mean. There's no right or wrong answer. And sometimes it's just a trial and error thing, right? So you just got to kind of put it down and see how it works, right? So that's going to take those two. And then the rest of them, they're just going to kind of hop up there. And they're going to run behind all that to meet up with some stuff I've got going on over there. In fact, let me go ahead and do that. Because there's some other good lessons that I learned while doing that as far as design goes. And I'd love to share them. And again, none of this should look too different, right? Except now you see the big bridge over there. God, I have to digress for a second. I love the way this is turning out. I'm super, super happy. Sorry. And I just want to let you guys know that. But here is one of those decisions I made to kind of make things work, And kind of the lesson here is that to not let perfection be the enemy of good enough, right? So if we go over here, I have some innocuous bridge right here, right? But what I want to show you is down here. And it's the fact that none of these foundations line up. I think they're pretty much the same height, but they're not snapping to each other, meaning they're technically on different grids. And that was something I had to figure out how to deal with. And you'll notice I kind of made up for that right here. So I guess the lesson that I learned here was, aside from not letting perfection be the enemy of good enough, is sometimes you just do what you got to do to make it work. And realistically, nobody's going to say, if I hadn't pointed that out, none of you guys would have noticed that. Or, what I mean? It's so unremarkable, but to me, that's something I had to make work. I had to make it happen. You see a little Z fighting, right here. It's fine. It works, and that's all that matters, right? So that's just kind of something else when you're trying to design factories. You just try it out, make it work. Everybody has their own tolerance for clipping, and there's no right or wrong answer, right? But anyway, so these 3 pipes are coming over here, the last 3 pipes, and again, I'm just kind of trying to pop those off. This is another design decision I made with this pipe. I probably could have kept this pipe to the left in line there and had it go in. And maybe I'll fix that in the future. But for now, it's fine. It's fine and it works. And kind of same thing, we're popping that out here because we're following it this way. And this is where I just broke that rule that I kind of just talked about not wanting to do, where I'm crisscrossing these things. But because this is such a tight space, and I didn't want to make, like the way I have it set up, I have to cross it somehow. You know what I mean? Unless I bring it all the way from over there around. So I figured this is just the easiest way. It doesn't look bad. And it's functional. You know what I mean? Like there's gas in it, right? So it was kind of more important just to get it all there. And now we have that done. I will say, it's kind of crazy, honestly, that everything, all the rock fuel stuff is just these two pipes, some sulfur that's sitting right there, and those iron plates way over there. That's all the input. We're going to have some output. We're going to have rocket fuel and polymer resin, but remarkably simple setup, honestly. And speaking of those solids, we're not going to bring those in this episode. This was the most important part to me, and you'll notice all of this stuff is split ahead of time, right? So everything is like, that's a 325 line, that's a 450 line of oil, and that's for every single input. The solids are a little bit different because it's very easy to go from a 1 to a 6, like from 1 line to 6 lines evenly with solids, beltable items, because you can just put splitters down. And so my thought process is we'll split all that stuff when it comes in here. So it's not that big of a priority to actually bring over here. I'll probably get it all set up inside to mount up, but I'm probably going to end up, I had kind of already anticipated doing something like this on the inside for the oil and the gas. Like that's how they're going to get in here. Maybe I can even bring this in a little bit more and have it go up closer to the center. I don't know. That's still up for debate, right? Maybe like mirror these right here or something. That could look kind of cool. I don't know. We'll see. But ultimately, all this stuff's going to go all the way to the top and then filter its way back down. So that it's going to be kind of trivial to just get 2 conveyor lifts to make that journey. You know what I mean? So I'm not too concerned about it. But yeah. So let me now show you. And this is going to... this part is going to have a couple different steps, right? I'm going to show you the thought process. I'm going to show you some of the buildings, some of the production buildings for the rocket fuel in place up there. And I'm going to talk about what I'm doing a little bit, and I'm going to explain to you why I'm changing it and how things are going to have to adjust and why I'm going to make some of the decisions I'm making. And then I'm going to transition to showing you the planning and the tooling I use to arrive at those decisions, right? So let's boop our way up there and check out some of the materials up there. Okay, so it's nighttime. This was a lot of work, and it may end up getting torn out. Some of it, not all of it. Let me explain to you. So you're going to see later. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my planning tools, and I'm going to show you numbers, and I'm going to show you kind of how I get to this point from what I planned with, right? But if we go in here, you're going to notice we got overclocks. Like, what is this clock speed? What is this production rate? There's a whole lot going on there, right? We have 6 machines. We don't have 8 machines or 8 point whatever. Kind of same thing here. What's going on with these refineries, right? This was not a first draft. Maybe first draft is accurate, right? Because this is what I did going off of one set of plans. And I'm gonna talk to you about Satisfactory Tools and Satisfactory Planner. Basically, one is a Steam application, one is a website. They're both incredibly useful, and they both have a lot of overlap, but there's some different things that they do differently that makes them useful in different ways, right? But ultimately what's going to happen is everything from this that way is all nebulous. And by that I mean it's all going to feed as one big line, right? So if you kind of follow these lines, this is all turbo fuel that's coming out of these blenders and these refineries that's distributed to these blenders here. These 6 blenders are making the rocket fuel. But if you'll notice, if you go look at their outputs are married up so that 2 blenders is feeding one line. Same here. These 2 blenders going down the middle, these 2 blenders going down the right side, right? That's something I'm going to maintain all the way down. And why am I doing that, right? Well, we know, and you might notice, right? We need 195 blenders. Really, I think it's like 194 and change. If we subtract 76 from the first floor and then 76 from the second floor, 43. 43 fuel generators left over. I don't have 43. I have 42. So that's where one of them is going to have to get done up, right? Now, if I also do 195 divided by 3, remember that number, 65, right? So each line is 65 generators. How do I even get to that, right? Well, basically, we're going to end up making 812.5 rocket fuel per minute when everything is said and done. All in all, right? Now, that's 812.5 per section here. Really, we're making 812.5 times 6. That's the total amount of rocket fuel we're making. But when you divide it by 6, we're just making this much. If you come over here, in fact, I'm going to remove this. This makes 100 per minute, right? So what did I have to do? I had to say, okay, well, what's 812.5 divided by 6? 135.416667. Meaning I need each blender to make that much. Well, if we go ahead and look, how much is this blender making? Let me paste that there. How much are you making? 135.42. Which, because these make 100 base, it was super easy to figure out that to turn my 8 point something blenders into 6, I just need to overclock them to that amount. Because that's what each one of them needs to make. Now, let's copy this. 135.4167, right? 135.4167 times 2. 270.8334. Okay. This is a lot of numbers, I know, guys. 270.8334 divided by 4.1667. In fact, I could throw some more 6s in there. And more. And we get more and more precise, right? What is this number? That is 65. Meaning, we have this set up so that these 2 blenders can feed 65 fuel generators, which is exactly what we're going to have in each corresponding line. I think that's super cool. I love the way that works out. And that's why we're kind of doing it that way. And because only these 2 blenders matter in terms of balancing this, everything else can feed into everything in a way where it all just kind of works out. So that's kind of why we're doing that. Now, let me go. I'm going to take you to a diorama world. I saw Kibitz do this, and I really like the idea for explaining concepts. And I'm going to show you kind of what the full setup looks like, because it's going to look a little bit different than what I've started here. This is going to change, and I'm going to show you how it's going to change in the diorama world. So let's hop over to there real quick. All right, so here's kind of the layout, and it's actually like really easy. There's not a whole lot going on here. Now, this is actually representative of what we're making. This is 1/6 of the total. So each section of each floor, right? So one section on each floor for 3 total sections is going to have all of this, right? And again, 112.5 rocket fuel, 195 generators, right? Those are going to be fed by those blenders. We just saw them. Nitric acid, turbo fuel, right? And they output that compacted coal. So that's going to be fed by a combination of blenders, turbo blend fuel, and turbo fuel. So we're using two different things. You'll notice we have some numbers here. Before, we had another refinery that was also doing turbo heavy fuel, right? So why this has changed, I'll point out into right after this, right? But just know that that changed, right? But it's simplified things. So now, again, this output, this compacted coal is just being fed back in here to make this turbo fuel. This is, it's got a lot more going on, right? But again, it's just producing turbo fuel. All that turbo fuel is feeding the rocket fuel blenders, along with this nitric acid from over here. This, super easy. Those iron plates, well, we just made those. Water is irrelevant. It's bountiful, plentiful. No worries there. Nitrogen gas, we just ran that, right? So that's, again, and I have all the numbers here, right? So what I'm going to end up having to do, because I am trying to use as few machines as possible, I'm going to overclock where it makes sense. We've already seen that we can turn 8.13 blenders into 6. Well, I know we can turn 8.58 blenders into 6 also. So what I'm really looking at is these numbers in relation to 4, 6, whatever, right? 5.42 refineries. I don't know. Can we make it 2? Well, maybe not, right? If we look here, 18.75, what is it? 5.42. Okay. 18.75 times 5.42. So 101.625 turbo fuel per minute. Can we even get that? Right? If I don't have power shards on me. But if this is like fully maxed out, does that give us enough to make, whatever, right? So that's kind of the calculations I'm doing. Like, when we get farther down when we need less stuff, 2.71 blenders, I can make that in 2. I can just divide that in half. Same thing here. This I can almost make in 1, but it's 2.51 blenders, right? But that can be one refinery. That can be probably 6 refineries, right? So these are just the stuff. This is like what I'm doing to make sure that everything is working out right. And then again, we know what the inputs are, right? The nitrogen gas, the water, the iron plates, the sulfur. Everything else is just fuel, right? Fuel in here, and that's what kicks it all off. So really, the idea is that we compress these machines into as few as possible to fit everything. And that's kind of the challenge. But this, I'll tell you, this setup is so much easier than the setup that I was doing before, because again, it's the difference in tools. And I'd kind of shown you guys the tools, right? So yeah, so let me take you to the tools, show you the numbers, and explain why we're going with this, and kind of how the tools led me to this decision. Okay, so this is Satisfactory Tools. This is their production calculator. This looks really complicated. If you've never used this before, let me show you how I created this thing, right? So let's go on a new tab, and we'll call this Test Rocket Fuel, right? Test Rocket Fuel. So if we go in here, and what do we want to produce, right? Production. I want to produce, I need one here. Rocket fuel. There you go. Now, it gives you a couple options. You can do, this will auto-generate based on if you wanting to produce X amount of items per minute, or in our case, I want to maximize. I want to maximize the rocket fuel based on what inputs I have, right? So you can either tell it how much you want to output, and it can tell you how many resources it would take, or you can kind of limit the inputs, and it'll try to maximize the output. So we're kind of going in that direction, right? So right now we don't have anything because it wants probably recipes, right? So in this recipes tab, you can tell it all of the alternate recipes you want to use, and or all of the regular recipes. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to allow all the recipes. Boom. Have we created something? We have. Okay, so we've generated something. This is incredibly complicated, but it says I can make almost 50,000 rocket fuel per minute. How? That sounds crazy. It is. And really it has to do with the items or the input items tab here. So I already know what this recipe is going to have. No bauxite, no caterium, no coal, no copper, no limestone, any of this stuff, right? So then what it does is it recomputes the recipe based on those limitations, right? And so if I let it have every resource in the game in these categories, we could make 30,000 rocket fuel per minute. But we know that there are limitations, right? So, and now I'm doing this in 1/6 of the quantities, right? Not the full amount that I'm dedicating to this project, right? So we know that crude oil, we're only giving it 450 per minute for each section. Nitrogen, we know we're only giving it 325, and sulfur, we know it's only getting 200. So then what does it do? It tries to, again, maximize the use of all those resources to produce stuff. And I'll tell you what, this thing that I'm looking at right here is a lot, let's say, more complicated than what I'm going to build. So if you look here, this has us doing turbo fuel in a refinery. Now, I will, if you have been kind of paying attention, you might notice that this is how I started setting up the factory. And then I thought to myself, this kind of doesn't make sense to me. This is a little bit insane. Like this is maximizing each resource to the fullest possible way, right? We're using all 450 oil. We're using all of the nitrogen gas. But notice, we're still making 812.5 rocket fuel per minute, which I thought was interesting, right? So this is a really good way to kind of figure out, given input limitations, how much of something can I output? Or saying, hey, if I want to make 10 per minute, what do I need? Well, you hardly need anything. If I want to make, 500 per minute, given my limitations, it'll do that for you. You know what I mean? So no worries there. But then now I want to bring up the other tool that I use, Satisfactory Modeler, because it has a different strength than this. This is very good from a planning and numbers perspective, but it's hard. It doesn't really give you the visuals that I like to see for when I'm setting up my factory. So let me bring up the modeler. So here in this modeler, right, I want you to notice a couple of differences. Now, if you've never used this, it's available on Steam, Satisfactory Modeler. It's also really nice. One of the things you can do, right, and I've got some other factories and stuff down here as well. In fact, we can kind of delete that, and I can kind of show you. If I want to start from something, right, so let's say I want oil. I want crude oil. How much do we have? Well, we got 450. Cool. So now I have this oil extractor. What can I make with it, right? And then you can kind of, we're going to make a heavy oil residue. And then from the heavy oil residue, we're going to make diluted fuel. And then, we need water. Let's get the water from, wherever. It'll tell you how much you need. We're going to make residual plastic. And then we're going to make recycle. You can do all this stuff, right? So that's kind of what I did here. I actually used the Satisfactory tools to help model this, right? And something I noticed here, if you notice, we're making 812.5. However, what it did is instead of trying to maximize the resource usage, it just kind of simplified everything. So now instead of having 2 refineries with one recipe and 2 from another, it's just using turbo fuel. Regular turbo fuel refinery. And, we're taking our output, our compacted coal, boom, boom. That's the limiting factor there. Now, what this illuminated for me was that I'm using not 200 sulfur. I am using 325 nitrogen, but I'm also using less oil in this. So somehow Satisfactory Modeler was able to come up with the same output utilizing less resources. I'm sure that I could if we bring back Satisfactory tools, I could probably make this to where if I'm only using turbo fuel, in fact, if I get rid of this, maybe turbo heavy fuel, does that change it? Yeah, so there you go. So this basically creates the exact same thing. Although even this is a little bit different because it's trying to use, yeah, there's so many different recipes that it tries to get you like the most efficient thing possible, but really I want to maximize, right? And in this one, it just completely gets rid of combat control, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can mess around with this. So I don't know. I'm just going with Satisfactory Modeler. I think it's just a little bit easier. It's maybe a little less machinery, but both of these tools are perfectly valid, and they'll both give you valid outputs, right? Like you can build what you see here. You can build what I put in Satisfactory Modeler. You can build it all and it'll let you, right? So those are just some of the tools that I use to plan out these factories. So with all that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Thank you all so much. I hope this wasn't too much talking. I hope we didn't get too crazy into this. If you like this kind of stuff, let me know. If you don't like this stuff, let me know. We should have more building and more actual production in the next episode, but I wanted to give this kind of framework before we got into that in case people were kind of wondering about the numbers and how you get to the numbers and what you can use to adjust the numbers, right? So anyways, guys, thank you all so much, and we'll see you in the next one.